Hello, I'm Maureen Ryan, and I'm the co-chair of the North Andover Parents Advisory Council, or NAPAC. I'm here today with my co-chair, Kirsten Lovett, and with Assistant Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Donna Straight, and we're here to give our presentation of the rights and responsibilities in special education.
So if we go to the next slide, we have laid out some of our goals for the presentation today. This presentation is available both on the North Andover PAC website as well as the school's website, the school department website. There's a lot of information here today, and we could spend 3, 4, 5 hours doing an in-depth presentation, but we want to really just highlight for parents your rights and responsibilities with special education and how you can work with the school department. So as we move forward on the next slide, we have listed a number of federal and state laws. And we're not going to go into these. These are on the website in the presentation, and there's lots of information available about these particular laws and the exact details of them. So if we move forward to the next slide, again, we've just listed a few more of the laws. But let's start to get into some of the questions that parents typically have about their basic rights. So if we move to the next slide, this brochure, the Parents' Rights brochure, is a great resource with a lot of this information as well. And again, it's on both of our websites, as well as you can see it's on the Mass Department of Education website too. And now to the next slide. So I guess the real question to start with, Dr. Straight, is when is a student eligible for special education?
So what we look for is specifically 3 criteria in order to ensure that a student is eligible for special education or specialized instruction. And the first one is if a student has an educational disability. So we would have to make that determination. Having an educational disability alone does not necessarily determine that your child needs an individual education plan. The second piece is if the student is not making effective progress in school, in the general curriculum, as a result of their educational disability. And finally, again, does the child need specialized instruction through special education services?
Great.
Thank you. Now, who exactly could refer a child to be evaluated to determine if they need special education services, for example?
So if we look at the next slide, you'll see that really anybody working with the child has the opportunity to refer a child for special education services. It could be a parent, it could be the classroom teacher, any number of people who have the suspicion or suspects an educational disability. And a referral can be made at any time during the school year. Occasionally someone will refer a child over the summer for one reason or another, but of course we know most of our staff are away for the summer, so we would really take a look at that child in the fall as well.
Now, sometimes people get their own evaluations done outside of the school district, a private neuropsych, for example. Does that mean they'll automatically qualify for an IEP if they have an evaluation done?
No, absolutely not. So I'll give you 2 examples of when somebody has an outside evaluation. So if your child already has an individual education plan and is receiving services through special education, if you were to say, oh, I had an outside neuropsych done, your team leader or liaison would take that and say, okay, thank you. We'll schedule a meeting within 10 days to review the new information that we have and apply anything new that we've learned about your child to their individual education plan as needed. In the second case, you may have a child who is not currently diagnosed as having an educational disability that requires an IEP. And in that case, if you were to bring us an outside neuropsych, we would take that as you're initiating a referral to the special education process, and then we have a legal right and obligation to follow through for the process that I know we can discuss later. So you don't automatically receive an IEP just because you've had an outside neuropsych. It opens the door to come to the table and have a conversation.
Right.
Great.
So if we look on the next slide, we'll see that there are a number of disabilities that may qualify a student for an IEP plan.
Correct.
This is such a wide and varied list of disabilities and services. So I guess one of the other questions that we get if we look at the next slide is, what exactly is special education? And I know sometimes parents often get confused between special education services versus just accommodations and things that are done as best practices in the classroom. So maybe you could just help define a little bit special education.
Absolutely, that's a wonderful question. So first I would say to you that if your child has one of the qualifiers that we discussed, whether it's autism, a neurological disability, perhaps ADHD, even a specific learning disability, that doesn't necessarily mean that they need an IEP. So that's kind of a misconception that a lot of people have. They make that natural assumption based on a diagnosis from a pediatrician for ADHD, for example, they would automatically receive an IEP. And that's not the case. We still have to go through the full process if somebody's made that request. But what also needs to occur is really looking at, does the child need specially designed instruction through special education in order to make advances in the curriculum, the general curriculum? They may or may not. We also have the opportunity to provide Tier 2 supports under response to intervention. There's Tier 1 supports, which is what you receive in the general classroom. Tier 2 supports may be something like a double dose of some reading instruction or some accommodations in the classroom, maybe under a 504, maybe not under a 504.
And can I actually stop you right there for 1 second? You just said under a 504, and I know that we receive lots of questions too. What's a 504? So could you explain just a little bit about what a 504 is and that it is different from an IEP plan?
Absolutely. A 504 is under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's put in place if there is something that changes the life of a child in a substantial way. So you may have a 504 because you have diabetes and you need certain accommodations during the course of the day. You need to go to the nurse and have your glucose checked, or you need to have a snack every 2 hours, as an example. So you would receive a 504. In some cases, a student may receive a 504, which is also a plan, but it's a plan that has accommodations on it for the child that helps the child access the school day. You may have ADHD and you need to take a walk periodically, or you may also be taking medicine and need to get down to the nurse to take your medicine. So it's very different from an IEP in that an IEP is individualized instruction, specialized instruction, whereas the 504 plan is really accommodations, and it could be, again, for a medical situation, it could be for an educational disability. They're both legally binding plans that the school district is required to follow, though.
And so they do have some different rules and regulations and procedures.
Absolutely.
And so today what we're talking about is the IEP plan.
Yes.
So just to kind of clarify that.
Very good. Thank you.
So if we move to the next slide.
So if a child does qualify for services, oftentimes the parent is very eager, very anxious about this, and wants to know how quickly can they get these services on the IEP. What is the timeline for all of this, the evaluation and getting to perhaps services?
Right, so perhaps to get to services, it requires 45 days of from the point where you've made a referral to the point where we're sitting at the table, potentially either saying your child doesn't qualify, but here are some accommodations that would be beneficial, or your child does qualify and we're going to draft an IEP and a placement for your child. So why does it take so long? Because you're absolutely right. Sometimes parents can be very frustrated by the process and the length of the process, or in the case of when we discussed the parent coming in that has a neuropsych evaluation that was done by an outside agency, and they say, well, according to this document, my child needs an IEP. Again, we take that as an initial referral, and we have a right and an obligation to do our own testing. So we have 30 days in order to make a determination through a team meeting, which includes the parents, and the parents provide input as well as the specialist, classroom teacher, anybody that the parent chooses to bring with them as part of the team. Make a determination as to what is the suspected disability. The suspected disability will drive the formal assessments that we will do, which might include an observation in the classroom, might include observations in the home or in unstructured settings, in a variety of speech and language testing, occupational therapy, physical therapy. It generally includes an IQ assessment as well as an achievement, looking at the areas of mathematics, reading, written language, and how the student is accomplishing as their typical peers are accomplishing. So once we make the determination based on the input, we have 30 days to conduct those evaluations, which are done by professional staff who are certified in order to do these assessments. Then we have another 15 days to come back to the table, present the information, and make a determination as to whether the child qualifies for an individual education plan.
Something that surprised me going through this process is it took a bit longer than I expected. These are school working days, not just 45
Yes, thank
days.
you for clarifying that.
Doesn't count weekends, doesn't count vacations, just the school days, right?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
the 30 days that we talk about school working days would really amount to 6 weeks, assuming there's no vacation or Monday holidays or those types of things in there as well. So
Yeah.
Right. So if we move to the next slide, we're going to head now into the 6 basic principles of parents' rights and responsibilities here. And again, the next slide here will show you those 6 principles. Again, there's a lot of information here and we could spend a lot of time.
hours.
The presentation is on both of our websites, and you can access it there at any time. And then the other thing that we want to just remind parents about is that NAPAC does hold monthly meetings, and Dr. Straight does attend those meetings. We are still setting the next school year calendar, but you should check our website for those meetings. And if you have specific topics or questions that you would like more detail on, please send them to us, and we will try and schedule a meeting around those topics. So, if we start off on the next slide, what does this mean for parents and students? And I want to emphasize students too, because at some point, right, it's the student who starts to take over some of the responsibilities here.
Absolutely. We want to enable our students as much as possible, and we do that through knowledge, education, and participation. They're going to improve by understanding, okay, I have an educational disability, so what does that really mean to me? And what are strategies that I could put in place, and how do I work around that? Because it's not a life sentence that means you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. They certainly can accomplish what their goals are, but it's understanding who am I as a learner and how do I present that information. So as part of the team sitting around the table, as the children age and it's appropriate, they need to come to the table and have some input into the development of their individual education plan.
So who are the members of the child's team? Who makes up the team for the child?
So first and foremost, it would be the parents and or the guardians of the child. The child is their age appropriate, and if the child is younger, sometimes we let them come in just to have a few words to say before we get into some of the details that really wouldn't be necessary or at their level of understanding. And certainly as they get to the age of 14, we engage in a transition planning process that the child absolutely has to be an integral part of. So there's the family, the parents, guardians, and the child. Then there's the liaison, which is generally the special education case manager, general education teacher. There is probably an administrator sitting at the table, as well as any of the specialists. There might be a speech and language pathologist sitting at the table. There might be an occupational therapist at the table. Whoever is required in order to implement or evaluate that child in order to make that effective progress sits at the table. In addition to that, the parents are allowed to invite whomever they'd like to have come and sit at the table, whether it's, their sister, their parent, a friend, whoever they would like to have come.
Great. Thank you.
Great. And as we said, we're skipping ahead on some of the slides here. So if we skip ahead to slide number 15 right now. Maureen, you want to tell them a
Yes.
little bit
Well,
about?
as we mentioned, we are here today with Dr. Straight as the District Parent Advisory Council, or NAPAC, North Andover's District Parent Advisory Council. And we work together not only with the district to advise them on the matters to the education and safety of our students with disabilities. We do meet monthly to work with the schools officials and the school board. We advise them, and we work together collaboratively on the matters that are important to our students with disabilities. We present workshops. We present a parent support group once a month, which is going to be meeting on the third Monday every month this year at the library. We have numerous events that come up throughout the year. We brought about understanding our differences over the last 3 years. And so we do get some assistance from the district. And so that's kind of what we do. We work as the liaison between parents and district. And so we are here. Our address is, I think, at the bottom of the screen, and people can contact us if they have questions. We're happy to work with them or to work between them and the school board. We have a board that can answer questions and can help with this presentation if there's anything else that people need. Yeah.
Right.
And as the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come to the PAC meetings and to share information as to what we're doing in the school district, what we're thinking about with changes to how we provide students with opportunities for learning, opportunities for getting out into the community, generalizing their skills. I think it's so beneficial to have that chance to speak with parents and hear what they're looking for and what they feel their needs are, and just get their idea of what we're doing and how it moves forward. Additionally, as we look at bringing in speakers for the coming school year, understanding our differences together and seeking volunteers, it's such a wonderful collaborative effort that I truly appreciate that opportunity.
As do we. As do we.
Great. Thank you. So we'll flip back to some more of the principles of the basic rights right now. And if we go to slide number 16, there are several steps along the way where parents have the right to participate in the decision making. And I think, as a parent myself, sometimes you may not realize that you do have the right and the responsibility, really, I think, to be involved in these different decision points. So, Donna, could you just walk us through some of these decision points?
Sure, absolutely. And one thing we recognize as, I may say we're the professionals in whether it's learning disabilities or speech and language, but you know your child better than anyone, and we understand and recognize that. And you as a parent are such an integral part of this process. So the steps that we have for special education is the referral, which we discussed, what the referral process is. The evaluation process, where again we make a determination as to what do we see as some learning difficulties that your child might be having, and that falls under academics, it could fall into behavioral, it could fall under social emotional. So we really take a comprehensive look at the whole child. We also want to know what's happening in the home or what's happening out when the child is in the community, and that's important to the process as well. And all of those conversations take place during the referrals and the evaluation. It helps us with the next step, which is the eligibility piece. We look at standard assessments, we look at formative assessments, we look at input from the teachers, general ed teachers, we look at the observations, and again, we look at the parents, anybody the parent wants to bring, and any opportunities we have to put eyes on that child in other settings and situations. So we make a determination based on that, and that's also important for the parent to participate. At that point, we enter into the IEP development, and parents are an integral part of that IEP development as well. There's the vision. What does the parent have for the vision? What does the team have for the vision? What are the parents' concerns for their child? what do we think are appropriate goals for the child based on the data that we've gathered. Also, MCAS participation. One thing that's important that we all understand as achieving a high school diploma is you need to pass a certain score in the MCAS, which is a state standard assessment. Well, in some cases, students might be taking what's called the MCAS alternative assessment. And oftentimes the MCAS alternative assessment, it's important for parents to understand that you generally are working with a child who probably won't be receiving a high school diploma. They're probably going to receive a certificate of attendance or participation, and they may be staying with us in the education system till they're age 20 or 22. So that's an important piece for parents to understand and be an integral part of that decision making. Are we going MCAS alt, or are we going to keep pushing and working on that MCAS test score? Placement decisions. Is it fully included and we're providing services within the classroom? Is it a partial inclusion and we're doing some pull-out services for the child? There's any number of placement decisions that parents are an integral part of. And then disciplinary actions. Within the disciplinary actions, students who have special education needs have certain rights under the law, where if the student has a certain number of maybe in or out of school suspensions or has some behavioral issues, that the team reconvenes and meets and has some conversations. Is this based on the student's educational disability? Do we need to make some changes to the IEP? Do we need to do some observations and maybe do a behavior plan? Just having those conversations. And again, it's so important to have the parent input, because we like to see what's happening in the home as well as what's happening in school, as well as in structured and unstructured settings. So it's really quite multifaceted and layered.
Right, and I think we'll get into a little bit later, but the parent does have the right to comment if they think maybe some of the IEP plan doesn't quite meet what they were expecting, and so there are different steps along the way to address those concerns and issues and. Right, so
absolutely. Right. And you don't always have to have a full team meeting in order to address those concerns or issues. You can certainly speak to your special education teacher, the classroom teacher. You could contact the special ed director in your building and have a conversation.
Right, that's a really important point, I think, is just making sure that your parents are keeping those lines of communication open.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you.
So if we move to the next slide.
And look at the second principle. What is a free and appropriate public education? They talk about this all the time. And can you just give us a rundown sort of what that is?
Absolutely. So when we're thinking about a student who has an educational ability, first and foremost, we want to ensure that they're having access to the general curriculum in the Massachusetts standards. That they're able to have the same access as their same age typically developing peers. So that's really our driving force. So insofar as what does the child need with regards to specialized instruction, related service, behavioral supports, that's where we look at the free and appropriateness of developing the IEP so that we can ensure that the child, to the best of their ability and to the best of our ability in providing those services, has access to all of that.
Okay.
That also starts, just to interject, we have a preschool program, as everyone does in their towns. So when a child becomes 3 years old, if they've already been through early intervention, they've already shown signs of having some potential educational disabilities, we can provide services at that age, as well as straight up for some students through 22 years of age when that's appropriate as well. Okay. So it's very comprehensive in looking at what free and appropriate public education is.
Great. So I think we've already kind of touched on the general curriculum. If we look at, on the next slide, the evaluation process. So we've covered kind of a student first getting on an IEP plan. What happens after a student is on an IEP plan?
So by law, at a minimum, we are required to, or at least put on the table, to do every 3 years, do a reevaluation of where the student is at. And again, that's a comprehensive evaluation where we're looking at IQ assessment, we're looking at achievement in academic areas, we're looking at any specific areas that the child is receiving goals and specialized instruction, and ensuring that we're administering appropriate both formal as well as formative assessments, gathering data from the classroom teachers, gathering data from the specialists, gathering data from the parents, and really analyzing all of that data to ensure we understand where the student is.
Great, thank you.
So if someone were not very happy with their evaluation, are they allowed to have another evaluation or an independent evaluation, or must they go with the school's evaluation?
So in some cases, parents may disagree with the results of the evaluation, and that's certainly well within their rights to do that. So at that point, what they can do is they can request through the school district an independent education evaluation, and there's a process that we go through for that has a sliding fee scale. They have to let us know within a certain period of time, 18 months, that they're dissatisfied. They have to lay out the rationale and reasons for why they're dissatisfied, and then we have a list of potential providers that they could go to. Another way is looking at their insurance company as a potential, but generally that is the process, that if they're dissatisfied with the results or questioning something.
Great.
There are times that also, if maybe they feel, for example, mathematics might be a concern for them, but the initial testing didn't really show that, there's always the potential of the team itself saying, okay, we will do some additional testing in that specific area to see if there are any issues in that particular area. So again, Kirsten, it's the communication piece, keeping that open and working together as a team, always remembering we want the best for the student. We want the student to be successful. We want the student to learn, and that's all of our mission and support.
Right, and again, that's where NAPAC comes in as well, trying to provide some parent-to-parent support. And again, I also encourage you to, reach out to other resources. Talk to your pediatrician, because they're a great resource for some of this information as well. So,
absolutely.
Now we're going to go ahead and skip ahead now to slide number 22.
Great. So if the evaluation and the team agree and the child is found eligible for IEP services, who actually goes ahead and writes the IEP?
So the IEP writing begins at the team level. So you've had your evaluations, you've had your assessment, or perhaps you already have an IEP in place, and every year we write a new IEP. We measure progress with both qualitative and quantitative data during the course of the year, make a determination if the child has met their goals and objectives, and then as a team, parents, potentially student, all of the teachers and professionals sitting around will then make a determination as to what the appropriate goals and services and objectives are. What does that look like on what we call a grid with the A, B, and C levels? So how much inclusion is there? How much, if any, pull out is there? What kind of consultation? So it's a team decision. So at the end of the team meeting, as a parent, you will walk out with, a piece of paper that says, here's the grid services you'll receive, and these are the specific goals you'll receive. And then it gives the professionals about 10 days to actually write those goals and complete that IEP in our system, and we send that out for the parent to review and then either accept, reject, or partially accept and partially reject.
Great, so lots of options there.
Lots of options all the time.
Right, and every situation is really unique too.
Quite.
That's the other thing to remember as you go through this. And, if we actually skip ahead here to slide number 25, something that you hear a lot these days is inclusion and partial inclusion and full inclusion. And one of the principles here is the least restrictive environment. What exactly does that mean?
I know one thing we do have in special education for sure is there's many acronyms and many statements, and they can be confusing to lots of people, never mind parents coming to the table who are just experiencing this for the first time. And so when we think about what is the least restrictive environment, again we go back to what is the purpose of having an individual education plan, and what is the purpose of providing students with these services? And it's to allow them to access the general curriculum, to make progress in their learning as their typical peers. So we start off saying, how can we provide these services? How can the student learn in the classroom with their peers, with the general education teacher, with the core subject teachers? And that's the most important piece. And from there, we make a determination as to whether it's going to be full inclusion, or are there pieces that we have to pull a student out. As an example, maybe it's a student who has extreme anxiety. So we want to pull that student out with other students who have a similar situation. And what we're going to do is teach them to understand, what is anxiety? How does that feel to me when I start feeling that way? What are strategies that work for me?
Yeah.
So that's not something you're going to do in the classroom to that level.
Right.
But it's certainly something you can generalize. So it really varies greatly, but it's really looking at a continuum.
Great.
So the next couple of slides go into a little bit more detail on that, and you can look at that on your own. We're going to skip ahead right now to slide number 28. And just, Donna, are there one or two things to highlight here?
I think the important piece when we're looking at procedural safeguards, first of all, of course, everybody receives their copy once a year, and it's a very large document for you to go through. But the thing to remember is that you are a participant of your child's education, and you have rights and responsibilities, and we want you at the table to understand what's happening and to provide your input. If you have some concerns or some questions, there's always options to go through, if whether it's mediation in a formal process through the Department of Education.
And I think the next slide goes
Right.
into a little
Okay,
of
great.
those
Yep.
details for folks.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
And
Or as I
resources.
said before, keep those lines of communication open. That's really what's important.
Right. So in addition to our website and the school website providing some great resources,
There are a number
on
posted
slide number
here,
30.
Great. Here are a few great resources that people can go to check out if they have further questions. We're happy to help. You can go to the school website. We recommend that you check these. And we want to thank you for joining us all today.
Yes.
This concludes our presentation on basic rights. Thank you very much.
And we hope to see everybody at our NAPAC,
NAPAC meetings. Check our website for dates and times.
Thank you, ladies,
you.
for
Thank
having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.